Welcome to the podcast, folks. Today we're delving into how the U.S. military's deployment on domestic soil is applied selectively, especially when it comes to the contrast between how white rioters and other protest groups are handled.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating dive into how the Posse Comitatus Act, meant to keep tanks off our streets, seems to only work half the time.
Exactly. You know, the idea is that no military force should act against U.S. citizens. But history has shown otherwise. Think about the Bonus Army in 1932, veterans marching for their promised pay, only to be met with tanks and tear gas on American soil.
Yep. That's a brutal reminder that the promised protection under law often becomes a tool for, political maneuvering.
And then you got the Little Rock Nine in 1957, 9 young black students trying to attend school, and they were actually met by a National Guard meant to block their entry until, Eisenhower had to send in the 101st Airborne.
It sounds almost like a twisted version of a school field trip, where instead of buses you get military troops.
Right. And then there's Kent State in 1970, 4 students protesting the Vietnam War, and, the Ohio National Guard ended up fatally shooting some of them. It wasn't a war zone, it was a campus.
Yeah, exactly. And isn't it, just contradictory? The same nation that preaches about protecting rights ends up turning on its own people in some cases to maintain order.
Absolutely. Now, jump ahead to the Watts riots of '65 and the LA riots of '92, where instead of a nuanced approach, the state response was heavily militarized. Curfews, armed troops, and crackdowns.
Right. It seems like every time race or class comes into the picture, the response isn't about de-escalation, but more about showing muscle.
Exactly. And then you look at Standing Rock in 2016, a peaceful indigenous protest. Instead of dialogue, what came rolling in were Humvees, riot shields, and sound cannons, almost as if defending the act of protecting clean water was seen as an act of terrorism.
Yeah. And that really begs the question, why does protecting environmental or indigenous rights get a different treatment compared to instances when white citizens are involved?
Now here's the kicker. The crown jewel of the double standard, January 6, 2021. A primarily white mob storming the Capitol. Windows shattered, police beaten, even a makeshift gallows erected. Yet you hardly saw a tank or a troop helicopter coming to the rescue.
It's like, if you look closely, the response was significantly tepid, no immediate military backup, whereas, just a few months back, during the George Floyd protests, thousands of National Guard troops were deployed on, peaceful protests.
Exactly. And, isn't that the stark irony? Black, brown, and Native activists faced massive military-type responses, while the white protesters on January 6 were met with what seemed like a deliberate inaction.
I get what you're saying. It almost appears that the very laws meant to protect all citizens equally, the Posse Comitatus Act, for example, are really only applied when it's politically convenient.
Right. You hit the nail on the head. The act is seen as a sort of, sacred cow, something that guarantees no tanks on Main Street. But then, in practice, it's like the treasure chest is locked, unless it's the right kind of populational look.
Right, exactly. Let's also talk about the Insurrection Act. Presidents can and have invoked it. Trump even threatened it in 2020 for protests, yet on January 6th, when the threat was clearly present, there was this evident hesitation.
Yeah. And that discrepancy says a lot, doesn't it? It's almost like the decision to use military force depends on who's behind the protest rather than the actual severity of the unrest.
Right.
And then there's the militarization of police itself. Thanks to policies like the 1033 program, small-town police now have access to military hardware. It blurs the line between normal law enforcement and, actual military force.
Exactly. You gotta wonder, when the military is on American soil, isn't it always about, like, who is being targeted rather than upholding a universal standard?
Precisely. The overall narrative isn't just about law and order, it's about whose law and order are being enforced. It's a systemic issue where certain groups get crushed under the weight of excessive force and others get let off the hook.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I do want to challenge one point, though. Some might argue that the military can't be used on U.S. soil for a good reason, protecting citizens from authoritarian overreach. Do you think the selective enforcement we see here undermines that principle?
That's a good challenge. I mean, if you look at it, the principle itself isn't flawed. It's the application. It becomes a tool, sometimes are used politically to either shield or target certain groups. When the same rules are applied inconsistently, the promise of equal protection just crumbles.
So it's really not that the law itself is bad, but the selective will to enforce it equally and fairly.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a scenario. It's like having two sets of rules for the same game. One group plays with one deck and the other group gets a rigged one.
Yeah, exactly. And that obviously leads to public distrust and, yeah, heightened tension across the board.
Exactly. Considering the historical precedents, from the Bonus Army to Kent State and then Standing Rock, there is a clear pattern of selective military intervention which, frankly, questions whose safety is really being prioritized.
Literally. It's like, while one group's chaos is being controlled with military precision, another group's dissent is essentially downplayed or ignored.
Right. And that selective enforcement not only reveals the bias entrenched in our system, it also deepens societal divides. When folks see a double standard, trust in our institutions can, quickly erode.
Exactly. And speaking of erosion of trust, the mishandling of January 6th further emphasizes that the law is not applied evenly. It's, in a sense, rewritten depending on who's at the center of attention.
Yeah, and that rewriting of the rule book isn't just a legal issue, it's a political and moral one. It speaks to a society where regulation and justice are obtainable privileges rather than universal rights.
True, yes. It makes you wonder what kind of precedent that sets for the future. Are we going to see more of this selective intervention, especially as political polarization grows?
That's the unsettling part. When you see these recurring patterns, it almost feels like we're trapped in a historical loop where the same mistakes and biases keep getting replayed.
And if I may add, isn't it a bit ironic that a law designed to protect citizens ends up being weaponized against them, depending on their skin color or the issues they champion?
Absolutely ironic. It's like saying the law is blind, but then noticing it's actually got, selective lenses that favor one group over another.
Right on. It really challenges our understanding of justice in this country. And if the state can decide who gets protected and who gets crushed, then where does that leave the average citizen?
Precisely. It leaves us with a system where law and order are not absolute concepts, but heavily dependent on politics and, racial and ethnic identities.
Yeah, and that's deeply concerning. So at the end of the day, what do we take away from all of this? Is it a call for a more consistent application of laws or a complete rethinking of how power is wielded domestically?
I'd say it's both. There's a desperate need for transparency and accountability in how military and police forces are deployed, and more importantly, the idea that justice shouldn't vary based on who you are must become a reality.
Yep, absolutely. It's a tough conversation, but one that demands we re-examine our priorities as a nation. Thanks for walking through that with me. It's definitely material that makes you rethink a lot about how things should be.
Totally. Let's keep probing these issues, asking the hard questions, and ensuring that regardless of who we are or where we come from, our rights and protections remain intact.
And that's a wrap for today's deep dive, folks. Till next time, let's all keep questioning and pushing for a fairer, more consistent application of justice.